Hi everyone, it's Cassy and Lauren coming to you from Fidelis. It's been a while since we last talked. As it happens, I live in Houston and Cassy lives in Florida. And if you don't live in a cave, you probably know that both of those places have been the victim of flooding lately. So I was in the middle of Harvey. Fortunately, my actual house did not flood, but people very close by, many people that I know were like boated out of their houses. So needless to say, I feel very fortunate, and we've been doing our best to help the community rebuild. And I know Cassy actually evacuated Florida because Irma was slated to be pretty bad, and I know it was pretty bad. Cassy, was there any damage to your house?
Thankfully, our house was okay. Our fence got destroyed, but our house itself was fine. But I know of one neighbor, at least, that has some pretty serious damages, and I know two families that have lost everything. So there's a lot of damage.
Oh my God. It's just so bizarre. It's like half of the country is drowning and half of the country is on fire. It feels like if we could somehow figure out a way to like meet in the middle and like give them some of our water and take some of their dryness, then things would balance out. But that's not how Mother Nature works, I guess. So needless to say, if you live anywhere other than Houston and Florida, please keep our states in your prayers, and we're all praying for the Northwest as they experience fires as well. But without further ado, what we want to talk about today is Cassy's conversion story. So I personally find, and I apologize in advance for the noise in the background, this is the life of a mom where there are tantrums happening, but we are going to push forward in spite of the background noise. Cassy's story is really intriguing to me because I'm pretty much a cradle Catholic. Like my parents sort of had a reversion when I was little, but for the most part, I was raised as a Catholic my whole life. So I find it really intriguing to hear the stories of converts, and especially Cassy's story is really unique. I don't really know anybody who went through RCIC, which is the Rite of Christian Initiation for Children. So Cassy, I think your family converted when you were younger, so you kind of remember going through that process. So tonight we're just going to ask Cassy some questions about her conversion process, things that she thought were good about it, things that she thinks could have been better, and how she's moving forward now as an adult and a mom with her own children to like catechize her children and her takeaways from her own catechesis as a kid. So, Cassy, first of all, what was your family's faith background, if any, prior to converting?
Well, my parents were, they came from two very different backgrounds. My dad is, Portuguese Italian, and he's from Massachusetts, and he's a cradle Catholic. My mom, on the other hand, she's adopted, but she was raised in Florida, and her parents were both very Southern, very, very Southern. And she was raised Baptist, non-denominational Protestant, Christian. And so I don't know what it is that made my dad fall away from the church, but at some point he did. Or maybe he just didn't have a strong enough faith life that he felt that he wanted to. I don't know what his story was, but we grew up Protestant. My brother and I did, and my dad obviously wasn't going to the Catholic Church. We went to a non-denominational Christian church where we had communion, which was literally little crackers with grape juice, and anyone took it. I remember I had it at some point. And the weird thing actually is that I was baptized Catholic. I was not raised Catholic, but they baptized us. So we were baptized, and then we were raised in this Protestant church. And I don't know what changed. I don't know what made my dad want to come back to the church, but something did. And he was able to convince my mom to at least consider converting. She did not plan to do it. Her whole point of view was, well, I'm just going to do this 1 week at a time at RCIA, and I'm going to challenge them every step of the way, and I'm going to prove them wrong, which of course she didn't, and she ended up converting. But so we did it as a family. She went through RCIA, and my brother and I went through RCIC, and eventually we all converted together, and after that, we were Catholic from there on out.
Do you remember, like, I mean, how old were you, first of all, when this process started?
I think I was 12.
Okay. So
when I actually started RCIC, but I think that they started talking about it a year or so before that. And literally the only thing I knew about the Catholic Church was that those were the churches where they had incense. I didn't know it was called incense. I just knew it was like stuff that smelled bad. And I was like, can we not go to one of those churches where they have the yucky smelling stuff? That was pretty much my, that was all I knew about it.
That's hilarious. Well, that kind of answers my next question, but which was, like, how did you feel about the thought of converting at the time? Were you ambivalent, or did you have a strong feeling about it one way or the other? It sounds like you were kind of against it.
I don't think it would. I mean, I was, but not so much because I was against the Catholic Church. We had a church that we went to, and we really liked it. You know, my brother and I did. It was, you know, very family oriented, and they had a lot of youth activities, and, you know, my parents were very active in the church. So it wasn't so much becoming Catholic. I mean, I had no idea what becoming Catholic meant. I just, you know, didn't necessarily want to leave our church.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's a question. I know nothing about the process of becoming a Catholic. So is it different if you're coming from different backgrounds? Like, did you have to go through a different process than someone who hadn't been actually baptized Catholic? Like, did that end up shortening the process for you, or how long does it take?
It doesn't. And I actually can speak about this knowledgeably because my husband was a convert and he was not baptized at all. So he had to be baptized as well. No, unless you have some kind of special circumstance, you know, if you have an accelerated private RCIA, or, you know, for some kind of circumstances, no, it starts in the fall and it runs up through Easter, and they do everything all at the same time. So everyone that's going to be baptized gets baptized at the Easter Vigil Mass right along with everyone else.
Okay. So there's the adults go to RCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation for adults. The children go to RCIC. How do the classes actually work? Is it like a once a week thing for a few months?
It's once a week for it's not a full year because it starts in September, I think, and it runs through Easter. So it's almost a year, and it's every week. And basically you go to Mass. You do not sit in for the entire Mass. You only stay for the liturgy of the Word. And it has been so long now, I can't remember. I think at some point you're allowed to stay for the entire Mass, but I could be wrong. But basically you go to Mass, and then after Mass, you go to your class.
And what are the classes like?
It's hard for me to remember now, but basically they're teaching you what the church is like. As a child, for RCIC, it's much more watered down. You know, you don't get into the nitty gritty of all of the, you know, the catechesis, and it was much simpler. I remember things being explained to us about, you know, the different parts of Mass. Like, this is the liturgy of the Word, and this is the, you know, the liturgy of the Eucharist. But they also didn't explain really anything in depth about that. It was just, okay, well, this is what that is, you know? So I didn't know, you know, specifically what these things were. Or they would explain what you do during Mass. Maybe other parishes do this differently. This is just my experience. I just want to say that. Like, they would say, okay, well, at this point you sit, at this point you stand, at this point you kneel. But they never explain why. Okay. You know, I didn't know for a long time that there were specific reasons that you stand at certain times or kneel at certain times, because no one ever explained that. So it was just, okay, well, you do this at this time. And learning the prayers. We had to learn all the prayers because Protestants don't know any of those prayers. I think the only one I knew was the Our Father. That was the only one. And so we had to learn all the prayers and, you know, learn more about Mary because, I mean, obviously Protestants, they don't teach about Mary. And so just very basic things.
Yeah. Do you feel like, I mean, at 12, do you feel like maybe it was oversimplified, that they could have gotten into more detail, or that there should have been, maybe you would have benefited from like some type of a continuing education?
Oh, they definitely should have gotten into more, and not even for a 12-year-old, you know, like, I mean, now having children myself and being older and being able to look back in retrospect at how poorly catechized I was, I feel like, I mean, just, I think we do kids a big disservice by watering down a catechism. You know, kids can understand a lot more. And explaining to a child, okay, well, this is why we're sitting, this is why we're standing, and this is why we're kneeling. That's not something that goes above a kid's head. They can understand that. You know, you can explain these things in more depth than just, okay, well, at this time, this is when you're going to stand. Like, yeah. You can get more in depth than that. And I mean, I do feel like there needed to be more of a continuing education. And I feel like that for RCIA as well, not just for children, but I mean, just in general, because you can't just put people through this crash course and go, okay, well, you're done now. You know, it needs to continue on past that. But I mean, that could probably go for a lot of cradle Catholics too.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there's a lot of cradle Catholics that could probably benefit from our CIC or our CIA, but we need that continuing education. It's hard, I think, because I think churches feel that they only have people for an hour a week, which is pretty much true. But it would be helpful if there were more opportunities to get that continuing education within the church. But so when you received your sacraments on the Easter Vigil, I'm guessing?
Yes. You go to confession a month or two beforehand, that was a very new thing, confession. Because again, Protestants are not big on confession. But that, I mean, being a kid, I didn't know that, confession was bad. But, that was definitely something I'd never heard of before. So you go to confession, and then a month or two later is the Easter Vigil, and I wasn't confirmed yet because they did that at 13. So I just got the Eucharist. Okay. And a year later, I was confirmed.
Okay, so it was kind of broken up. So you were baptized at birth, and then you received the sacrament of penance before the Easter Vigil, then the Eucharist on the Easter Vigil, and then you were confirmed a year later. So, okay, that makes sense. What was your faith journey like after your official conversion and receiving the sacraments? Did you go to church every Sunday, have a relationship with God, or what was it like for you?
We did go to church every Sunday, and I can definitely say that, we were active Catholics, and my my mom definitely had, I feel like, a close relationship with God. As far as me, I mean, no. I liked the church. I liked being Catholic. Like I said, we went to church every Sunday. There was a period where I did feel like I began to have more of a relationship with God. That was after I went to the Steubenville Youth Conference for the first time. And that was the one time, it was about a year or two, where I felt like, I had more of a closeness, and more than just going out of, well, this is what you do on Sundays. But then at the same time, in retrospect, I can look back at the Steubenville Youth Conference, at least my experience of it, and kind of side-eye it a little bit, because it was, again, all very shallow, very, there wasn't very much depth to it. It was a lot of, just singing and praise and worship, and, there was this whole, on Saturday night, they did adoration. I didn't know what adoration was. I had no clue what was going on. So that's still, they were carrying the monstrance around. I didn't even know what it was. I had no clue. I just knew that, there's a priest, and he's carrying his gold thing around. And so, I mean, it's kind of complicated to say, I definitely felt like at times that I had more of a relationship with God than I did at other times. But looking back, it wasn't enough. It wasn't real. There wasn't any depth.
So did your experience going through this as a child and as a teenager, do you have any takeaways for how you want to proceed differently with your own children and their catechesis? Like, what are you doing to try to help them avoid some of the challenges that you faced when you went through this process?
Well, for me, and this isn't even really specific to being a convert, but my parents didn't really bring their faith home with them. And I don't mean that in a negative way. You know, like there were crucifixes and stuff on the wall, and, you know, I know my parents prayed, but and a lot of this is probably because my mom was not a cradle Catholic. She didn't know any of these things. So that's probably a lot of the reason why. But I didn't know that there were, you know, liturgical traditions, you know, throughout the year that, you know, there's certain, not that you have to do, but that you can do. You know, like at the Epiphany, you know, like chalking your door. We didn't do any of those kinds of things. Or the idea of having a name day, you know, like you're celebrating your name day or celebrating your baptism day or the day that you got confirmed. You know, none of those things happened. None of those things, I didn't grow up doing any of those things. So that's something that, you know, I try to be mindful of, because I don't want my kids to just see being Catholic as, you know, well, we go to church on Sunday and that's it. Or, you know, that it's just this boring time at Mass and going to confession. And, you know, I want them to have the richness of not just the Catholic faith, but the culture too that comes with it. And I want it to be something that permeates our family life. So it's difficult to do that because I'm essentially starting from scratch. I have no idea what I'm doing. So I'm definitely reaching out to a lot of, you know, Catholic friends that were raised Catholic, you know, what do I do now? And getting some good advice, but I'm trying to, you know, give them a more richer faith life growing up from the start than what I had.
That's kind of a good seg. You mentioned reaching out to your friends, to my next question, which is having received the formation that you did and then finding it a little bit lacking and having questions as you move forward. Like, what are your go-to resources now as an adult? Like, do you tend to like just crack open the catechism when you have a question, or do you turn to friends or like online resources? What kind of resources would you recommend to people that might be in a similar situation? I think all Catholics probably have questions at times.
Well, what I would like to be able to do is for there to be some sort of, you know, program or ministry or something. And I'm sure that at some parishes, they do have that kind of thing. And actually, our diocese has something for young adults. And now that I'm 33, I think I'm too old. But it's called Theology on Tap, and they meet at bars. And there is a priest that I don't know if it's the same one each time, but a priest goes and they drink together, and the priest will, you know, teach about theology. And, you know, I remember when I moved here, I was like, wow, that's such a great idea, but I'm too old now.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of those groups are really geared towards singles and not necessarily people who have kids. It's a little awkward to like come in and be like, hey kids, I'm like the old person here. But also I love the formation. Yeah, that's exactly why I'm like, oh, I wish I could go. But something like that would be my preference, you know, some kind of, you know, ministry or, you know, through the church. But absent that, what I typically end up doing is I have a few friends that are like my little, you know, Catholic experts. So whenever I have a question, you know, I reach out to them, and if they don't know, then they can kind of point me in the right direction. So it's probably going to vary per each person, though. I mean, some people, it's going to be easier for them to just go straight to the catechism or to read, you know, an encyclical or, you know, whatever the case may be. That's more difficult for me personally because I don't even know where to begin looking. So I kind of hope other people will guide me. And so far they have. That's one of the really great things about the internet, I think, for Catholic people, is that we can find we don't necessarily, the people that we ask might not necessarily know the answer, but there's always someone who knows where to point you. And it's usually like available right at your fingertips, which is so awesome. Like, I have a minor in Catholic theology, and I still feel like I barely know anything about the faith, and I'm constantly trying to find answers to things. So yeah, it's definitely not a problem that's unique to converts, but your perspective is so interesting, and just like kind of starting that process, like a good portion of the way into your life. It's such an interesting perspective.
Yeah, and I haven't met almost anyone it's very strange. I don't think there's very many people because I remember there being other kids in my RCIC class, but I don't really come across, I mean, people tend to be either, kind of cradle Catholics or converts and not kind of in the middle like we were.
Yeah, honestly, I can't really think of anyone else I know that has gone through that process. I don't know why it's rare. I know I see children when I'm at church, and I see people that are going to RCIA and they have kids with them, but somehow I don't really know any of them in my own life. So, yeah. Well, Cassy, is there anything that you would want to add that maybe we haven't talked about? Any comments or advice that you have to people listening? And I'm going to look and see if there's any comments or questions that other people have asked as well.
Well, I mean, I think that just in general, there's a real problem with catechesis for children in general. I mean, regardless of whether you're a convert like me or if you are raised in the Catholic Church, there's a real problem with how people are catechized. Like, I don't know hardly anyone that as an adult now talks about how they feel confident in knowing everything about well, not everything, but, knowing a lot about their faith. And even just from anything from people saying, okay, well, how can I evangelize to people? How can I talk about this to, Protestants when they sit there and ask me questions? I don't know what to say. Or, not understanding why we do X, Y, and Z at Mass. All of these things, it's very common to hear people not understand all of these things about our faith. And it's a real problem. And it's hard to know how to avoid that, kind of trap with, now that I'm a mom with my kids, because I don't want them growing up and then when they're in their 20s and 30s, looking back and being kind of clueless like I was. And it makes it difficult now too, as an adult, trying to be, more devout, because there's so much that I like. The divine office you talked about, you prayed that when you were, a nun. Never heard of that till a few months ago, literally a few months ago. So first I'd never even heard of it. And it was because a friend of mine said, hey, maybe you might like to pray this, and no clue what it was. And I'm kind of trying to stumble through praying it now, and I struggle, but I'm trying.
It's really complicated. I don't even know if I remember how to do it right.
I even have an app. I have an app, and I'm still a little bit, get confused sometimes. And, praying the rosary, like I know how to pray the rosary, but I don't remember what the mysteries are off the top of my head. So I have to follow along. Yeah. Which mysteries are, So it's frustrating because you get to be an adult and you try to be more sincere in your faith life, and you struggle because you weren't raised to know any of these things.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned apps, and I feel like apps are kind of a godsend for learning these things. They're like a really big benefit that we have in this this age. So do you want to mention the app that you use, because it might help other people?
Well, for the Divine Office, the one that I'm using, it's called iBreviary, I think.
Okay.
And it's actually pretty straightforward. The only one that I kind of struggle with is the morning prayer, because just the way that they have it formatted, I'm kind of like, wait, am I supposed to click on that? Am I supposed to just what do I do? But for the most part, it's actually pretty easy. And so yeah, that's what I use for that. Okay. And there's I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but Laudate.
Oh yeah, I think I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have the Divine Office as well, right?
Yes, but I liked the way that the breviary was formatted. It seemed more easy to follow along with. But Laudate it's got a confession app, which is really great because it's got examination of conscience on there, and that's another thing, speaking of which, is just going to confession growing up. I didn't know you had to do an examination of conscience. I just kind of would walk in there and whatever I could think of. Or, you know, the idea of not going to communion if you haven't, like if you've committed a mortal sin, like if you haven't gone to confession recently, you're not supposed to take communion. I never knew that.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up going all the time. I would not go to mass for months on end, and I would, you know, come back and just kind of walk right in and go right up and take communion and not think twice about it. It never occurred to me, never once. And I remember in high school, there was a student, I wish I could remember where he was from. He was from South America that had moved here to Florida. And he went to mass, he went to my high school, and he went to mass with us one time, and he didn't go up for communion. I remember asking why. Well, I haven't been to confession this week. And I thought it was the weirdest thing I'd ever heard. I'm like, so what? Who cares? You know, and now as an adult, I'm like, well, no, he had it right.
There you go. They were doing something right in South America.
So that is actually really useful, because the examination of conscience is not something that I had ever known to do before. So that's really helpful. You know, before confession, I'm sitting there on my phone going down, looking at, because just, and even just the types of things that, you know, you're supposed to confess. Again, like as a kid, I mean, just a teenager, no one had ever just, I always thought it's just for like really big things, you know? So it's really helpful to have an app that sits there and outlines, you know, common things that, you know, kind of give you an idea of when you're clueless, like I have been.
Yeah, the apps are great. And I feel like just paging through them, like I'll find things that I forgot existed, like for prayers after communion, things like that. I have an app on my phone called Universalis, and it has like all the readings for Mass, and then it also has like the order of Mass. So I get really distracted in church, and I know that actually being on my phone might distract other people, but it keeps me focused to be on the app like through the whole Mass. And so I will turn it on and just follow from like when the priest starts talking until the end of the Mass, like every part of the Mass, reading along and just like try to keep my head in the game. And it also helps because now we're that family that like uses the nursery at Mass, but now our oldest goes with us, and it really helps him stay focused too, because he gets super fidgety. And that app has just been such a godsend to be able to not only follow the readings, but to go through it from beginning to end and just try to keep your mind a little more focused on what's going on. Christina Merrill had an interesting comment. She said she's Catholic, but still learning about these traditions, and she grew up in an area with very few Catholics, so it just wasn't part of the culture to celebrate saints' days. And I think that's a really good point, that a lot of what people tend to know about their faith and have exposure to is based on their like geographic location and demographics. And so there can definitely be like, if you're in the Bible Belt, you can almost feel like an anomaly being a Catholic. When I lived in Alabama, I know that having a community of nuns in the middle of rural Alabama was like, we would go to the grocery store and little girls would be like, "Mom, it's a princess," because they had no idea like what a nun was. And I can imagine it would be very difficult to practice your faith when you feel like an outsider. So that was a great point.
Yeah, and that comes back to the whole, you know, building a Catholic culture. The saints' days and, you know, celebrating your baptism and things like that, I know those aren't things that you have to do. But for me, I think, okay, well, that is an easy way for me to try to bring it home to my kids. Because I have that on an app on my phone now, you know, on the calendar on my phone. So it'll remind me about a week before, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's, you know, the Feast of St. Benjamin. All right, well, let's make sure to get him a cake or something so that, you know, just a little something special that can make it something that we practice at home. Mm-hmm. And I see Lauren Ellis is, you know, mentioning abstaining from meat on Fridays. Again, no clue that was a thing you did outside of Lent. No idea until a few months ago. Literally just found that out a few months ago. No idea that you're supposed to still do penance or abstain from meat on Fridays outside of Lent. I thought that was just a Lent thing.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone as a convert in that assumption. That's pretty much ubiquitous.
Yeah, it goes back to the, being catechized poorly. And it's a problem across, the church for a lot of people. It's not just being a convert. And it's a big struggle now these days, for me. So I try really hard. I try, not necessarily successful all the time, but I try to kind of fix those things. And, daily mass. I try to go to daily mass now. Never went to daily mass a day in my life up until, a few months ago. So, it's in going to adoration. My parents never took us to adoration. So I try to take my kids now. We have children's adoration once a month and I take them and they seem to like it. And, they do the benediction and the exposition, which is really nice because, that's exciting for them to see. As much as I hated the incense when I was a kid, I'm hoping that them growing up with it, they will like it.
Yeah. Yeah, it won't be so foreign and stinky for them. That's awesome. Well, we really appreciate all the comments that people are leaving this time. It feels like there might actually be people watching our video. So flattering. Cassy, your story is so engaging and you're such a good speaker. So thank you so much for sharing it. And people, please feel free to keep leaving questions for Cassy in the comments and she'll respond to them later on. But thank you so much for watching. We want to invite everybody to like our page, share this video, tell your friends. We would love to create a community and just help to support each other and try to remember we're both super busy and I'm kind of like a chicken with my head cut off. Cassie's the one who has to keep me in line, but we're trying to remember to create memes and whatnot to share and just encourage people to just keep that liturgical calendar in mind throughout the week and just practice those small devotions as we can. So we thank you guys all for watching and we hope to see you next time.